Hello and welcome to the Paid Media Lab podcast. My name is James. I'm the content lead at Lunio, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Tomasz Abbott-Wieczorek, who is the founder of PPC Profit Club and one of the leading Google Ads experts on LinkedIn. To date, Tomasz has profitably spent more than $250 million on Google Ads, and he has previously ran in-house campaigns for global brands such as Huel and Domino's. He founded the PPC Profit Club in 2024 to distill his industry experience and knowledge into courses and frameworks, while simultaneously providing a platform where like-minded paid media specialists can come together, share, and learn to thrive in today's rapidly evolving landscape. In this episode, Tomasz outlines his strategy for localizing ad copy to specific countries and regions to drive improvements in performance, specifically when it comes to click-through and conversion rate. So if you're someone who routinely uses the same ad copy from multiple different countries around the world, then this episode will help you make smart changes to that copy so that it resonates better with the intended target audience. One of the tips which I personally thought was brilliant, which Tomasz shares in this episode, was his recommendation to use a VPN to change your browsing location, search for relevant keywords, and then look at how your competitors are positioning themselves within that particular market to see if there's anything you can take inspiration from. Tomasz gets into all the details on that in the episode, so let's get into the full conversation to learn how you can uplift campaign performance by localizing your ad copy. Tomasz, welcome to the Paid Media Lab. Great to have you on.
Thanks, man. Good to be here.
It's good to have you on in particular because we recorded a webinar together back in July last year, and it was one of the most positive responses we've had to a live session. And I think people really loved the ad examples that you shared, including the classic "I'm here in my garage" video from Ty Lopez. Do you remember what was the response like from your network after we had that session?
Yeah, it was crazy, honestly. Like, I had so many people joining my community, messaging me on LinkedIn, like literally probably had over 100 messages of saying, hey, I really enjoyed that. That was super valuable. So yeah, really enjoyed it. And yeah, looking forward to today to drop some more value.
Yeah. So I'm sure like people find this conversation today equally actionable, equally useful. We'll be doing a deep dive on how to localize ad copy to boost performance, which I know is a strategy that has worked well for you for a long time now, and you've kind of really drilled down into this and you've been a big proponent of it. But before we get into that, I know you've been doing a lot of work, as you just mentioned, for the community you founded called PPC Profit Club. So could you just let people know a little bit about that and the kind of things you've been working on there recently?
Yeah, so I've been in PPC now almost a decade. It's basically all the systems, templates, frameworks that I've built and coached over 500 PPCs in the last few years with. All the systems I've helped them grow with, basically put them in a community, in a group, and people are loving it so far. Relatively new, but yeah, going really well. Really cool to see a lot of people networking, getting referrals in there as well, which was like pleasantly a nice pleasant surprise actually. I didn't realize it would happen this early on in the community. So for example, we've got two members where they've just started a podcast actually, and they didn't know each other before, and they just met inside the mastermind, linked up. Fran and Jan, it's actually pretty good, two names together. Fran and Jan, yeah, shout out to them. They've just started like a PPC podcast together. So yeah, just so cool to see people collaborating, and yeah, so excited to see what people get up to in the future there.
Anyway, we will now move into our kind of main topic for discussion today. Which, as I mentioned before, is about ad copy and the localization of it. So could you give us a brief overview of what you mean when you say ad copy localization and why it matters for PPC?
Yeah, so it's like if you've ever seen all the big discounts they do in the US on a lot of landing pages with a lot of, for example, going off Ty Lopez, like we spoke about last time, all the big 99% discounts and all this sort of thing. If you had that in the UK and you were a person in the UK looking at that, you probably wouldn't be that excited about it, right? And that's sort of a great example to think about of how different people in different countries all around the world think about, respond to ad copy, landing page copy. Another like example for the UK would be like if you were running like an alcohol brand, drinks brand on Google Ads, and you said, hey, like, enjoy your drink outside in the sun, and it was December in the UK, right? Probably that ad wouldn't do very well. So it's not just about translation, right? It's not just about translating into different languages. It can be between the same language. So for example, UK, US, both speak English, but it's very different. Psychology, buying psychology. And then you've got countries all over the world where we might speak the same language, might speak different languages, but it's all about actually going into the local words, the local lingo, how they think, how they speak.
If you're kind of making an effort to make these tweaks and these adjustments to your ad copy to make it resonate with the local audience, what kind of improvements would you expect to see in things like click-through rate and conversion rate once people go through to the landing page?
Yeah, it's almost like starting a whole new brand that speaks specifically to your target audience in a specific country. I would think of it like that dramatically. In terms of improvements. So like I've seen, for example, I worked with a US brand recently where we optimized, localized a lot of the landing pages and ad copy for different states, and focused on 3 main states to advertise in. And literally like the CTR, the click-through rate, went from like 1% to 8% over a couple of months. And then the conversion rate went from 1 or under 1%, actually, 0 point something, to about 7% in about 6 months. So literally like very dramatic 7-8 time increase.
And there was no change to the offer there? Like the offer was the same, it was just a copy on the landing page that was the main change?
Yeah, there were definitely other things we did, but I would say that was like the main part of it was the localization piece.
Yeah, nice. And in my head, like thinking about this, it seems like this is something that regardless of which industry you're in, which vertical you're operating in, this seems like it might be worth looking into. But are there any particular industries that you think this works really well and it should really be a key part of your strategy if you're in a particular industry?
Yeah, so I think probably food and drink, which I've had a lot of experience in, is probably the biggest one. Consumables, anything you consume, I would say, because then it comes down to how people consume it, which is so different in different countries, right? So you could look at, for example, the difference between on a subscription service, like a lot of food and drink are on subscriptions, for example, how you consume it, it's a completely different word, term, that the way you consume it is just completely different. Think of in Germany, for example, they often use this sort of word, which is translated basically to like recharge. That's their subscription, sort of equivalent word to subscription in English. Whereas we would say subscribe. For example, we're in the UK and you saw a page and it was, for example, a German brand. It was just translated. The landing page and the ad copy, which I've seen a million times over, where different brands from different places just sort of plop a campaign in another country, and they just translate it, straight translate it. They don't actually look into what's the meaning, what's the localization behind it. If you saw the word like recharge instead of subscribe in the UK, you would just be like, that looks weird, right? That doesn't sound right. So I see that all the time. And you see this a lot as well, even between like English speaking countries as well. For example, like cart, basket, buy, like different countries use completely different words and it can just be very jarring a lot of the time.
Yeah, even like it can be so subtle sometimes, like you might not even be aware, like some of this stuff is like almost seems like it's a subconscious level, like something just seems off about it. You can't quite place your finger on exactly what it is, but it just doesn't seem right, doesn't fit with what your expectation is for when you hit the landing page. And yeah, that can have big knock-on consequences. Is there any advice or tips that you would give people to identify the correct local language or get insight into the correct references or the correct phrases to use?
Yeah, so to be clear, launching in a new country is a ton of work. And to make it work and to get good results, it's generally a load of work, right? So my first recommendation to anyone listening to this would be just don't launch in new countries unless you have the resources, the time to put into it, And you've got to look at it as, okay, maybe this won't work. Maybe this Google Ads campaign won't work in this new country until we figure everything out for like the next 6 or 12 months, right? Because I see this sort of false assumption a lot of the time where, oh, I'm just going to launch in all these countries and it's just going to do just as well as my home country. Well, probably not. Most of the time you need to figure out all those things. So one of the main questions, like most on a basic level, the main question I would ask yourself if you are running campaigns in different countries is just go through with your client and say, hey, how do you feel about this country? What's the performance? Are we running other channels? Basically, how is it, right? And more often than not, I get back from my clients I go through and accounts I audit. They say, oh, actually, I forgot we're advertising in that country. Yeah, it does rubbish. It does absolutely rubbish. I don't know why we're advertising there. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's just pause that then. Let's put that money into maybe a home country or another country that's actually performing well. And it sounds like a no-brainer, but unfortunately in Google Ads, the default a lot of the time is to advertise worldwide. So that's what catches a lot of people out a lot of the time. And also Google often recommends as like a easy to them way of growing or spending more on ads is to just expand into different countries. But yeah, I would just really hammer home the point that like it's not easy. It does take a ton of work. A lot of these things like aren't just overnight things that you can do. So if you want to do something today, I would just say look through your countries and maybe reevaluate, right? Like pause or say, hey, like let's pause this, let's revisit it at a later time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And like maybe look at the regions where your ads are performing well, compare those against the other regions, and if there is a significant drop off in particular regions, then yeah, it probably is worth pausing those and saying, look, when we have the resource and time to be able to commit to that, to uplift the performance of those campaigns in those regions, that all makes sense. Are there any notable kind of recognizable brands out there that people would be aware of that do this approach particularly well and can localize their ad copy in a way that speaks to audiences in a way that resonates with them in their particular region?
Yeah, the best way to think about this, I think, example that will hit home for everybody watching is McDonald's. When you go to a different McDonald's around the world, they're going to have a different menu. And that doesn't happen by chance. That just doesn't happen by random, right? Like there's definitely 100, 1,000 people working on all those localizations of, tweaking the recipe. Like things taste different, right? Even if you get the same Big Mac, it's going to taste different in different country, right? And that's the best way to frame it and look at these things is, that's not by accident. There's clearly a return on investment there for McDonald's. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother doing it. So that's the best frame I think about in my head that you can use to think about, is it worth it? And to look at brands that do it well. I'll just look at, you could pretty much pick any of the big brands around the world and just see, okay, how is, and I find it really interesting. Like I often go into, I know a lot of people have this as even their hobby on YouTube, like going to the different McDonald's around the world, trying the different items, seeing the differences and saying, hey, this looks the same, but it tastes completely different.
Yeah, the McDonald's point is great. Like I never even thought about it, but as soon as you said it, it was like, oh, that's a great point. And I think it's one that everyone can resonate with, if they've traveled and they needed something quick, they popped into McDonald's. When it comes to testing the effectiveness of any tweaks or changes that you've made, is it just a kind of standard A/B test where you've got your control copy and you've got your experiment where you've changed something to fit the local audience? Is that kind of most of it, or is there anything else that you would say people should be aware of when they're trying to test these tweaks and alterations that they might be making?
Yeah, so I would always start with a person, like an actual real human, real world search, as far as grab a VPN, go and search in these different countries and see what pops up. You'll find new competitors, you'll find new ads, you'll find new phrases, maybe if it's a different language. I would always start with just the real, like the real human, like what's out there already, right? Instead of guessing or testing things. I think PPCs often run to like test, but actually you've got proven things out there that you can already see and know work. So I would start with that. And often I'll find just somebody that I know. Maybe it's like a family friend, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's, another freelancer, for example, that is from that country or has experience in that country. And I would just sense check it with them and say, hey, like, does this translation make sense? And more often than not, they'll say, no, that sounds weird. That sounds completely weird. That's not how I would say it. And again, like I can think of Portuguese or Spanish is a great example where there's a zillion different ways to say the same thing. And depending on how you structure the sentence, sometimes it can sound like an English person trying to speak Spanish, for example, or American Spanish, for example, right? Like more like a Colombia sort of dialect or the way they speak and the way they construct sentences. Like the phrases they use, the terms they say, like it's completely different. So I'd always check with the actual person first. Am I on the money or not? Before you actually start testing. I mean, a great way to think about this is like Netflix. Netflix is just one big A/B test. It's just one big split test. Like every single time you go on your Netflix homepage, they're measuring the hover time. So the amount of seconds you hover over different episodes, different series, what series you go into, what series you watch, and then obviously it builds up your recommendations from that. And then if you're on a VPN in different countries, you'll see completely different series, right? And again, that's not like by accident, that's not by random. There's definitely like a zillion people that their full-time job is to just test that. So that's always a good frame to think about, like how I would, go about it. And like, if you're thinking of like, how would I test this? How would I go about it? Just look at some of the best examples and then try and, I would say, make a small scale version of that, right?
Yeah. And I think that that's a great point, that sense check things first. The idea of using the VPN, that's a great tip that people can go away, apply immediately, super easy to do. Like you said, if you know people from that particular region, if you're connected with them on LinkedIn, if you've got an existing network, tap into that. That's a great idea, and it's going to save you a lot of money on running tests that just shouldn't have been run in the first place. One of the other things is, obviously, with everything that's going on in the world of AI at the moment, there's just constant headlines. We will wait and see what happens with DeepSeek and all the rest of that. But with all those tools that are now available to people, do you see there are any applications for ChatGPT and other models to help with this strategy? Or do you think it's better if you try and do it the old school way and try and put some brain power to the copy that you're crafting? Or is it a balance between the two?
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. I would say one thing to watch out for all the things that AI is great for. One thing I've noticed is, and I was actually reading about this last night, to get a little bit technical, for example, DeepSeek and some other AI models, you can run locally, as in like you can run them on your own computer. And then you're downloading a model. So that model basically stays the same, like which model you're using. And over time, it's going to basically act the same. Whereas the issue I've found a lot, especially with ad copy, is if you're using something online where the processing is going on somewhere else, like ChatGPT, for example, you're not running it on your computer, right? It's being run in a server somewhere on the other side of the world. With that, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I feel like that's a big issue that I've definitely faced recently, where sometimes it comes up with amazing ad copy and sometimes it just absolutely breaks down and like gives you some crap response that has loads of emojis and like is really generic and AI generated. And it feels like sometimes it forgets your prompts, sometimes it forgets your instructions. Like that's pretty annoying. Something I've run into recently a lot with like GPT 4.0. But when it does work, it's absolutely amazing. So I guess for now, I would say like a mix basically between the old school sense checking things, but also, getting ideas and brainstorming. Brainstorming is probably the most useful way I find to use AI, is to say, hey, I have these ad copy, like critique it. What do you think? And give it as much context as possible. That's always the advice I'd give as well. Literally copy and paste whatever you're doing, copy and paste the landing page, copy and paste the business information, like just give it as much as possible is always better, because then it has more context to work off.
Yeah, that's solid advice. And just when you mentioned about models forgetting your prompts or not giving you the right outputs, I just remember I was working on a kind of data-driven research piece, and I was deciding to experiment with Gemini, and oh my God, man, like it couldn't get my prompts. And I was like, is it me? And then I took it to ChatGPT and then immediately got the output that I wanted from ChatGPT. So it is worth experimenting with different models. Even if it's the same prompt, you can sometimes get very different outputs from different systems. So well worth playing around there. Coming on to like the final couple of questions. So something that's come up quite a few times in events that, in-person events that we've run in the Lunio office is this topic of brand guidelines. And often they are seen as a way of constraining ad creative. And, an agency might be working with a brand and they've created this new range of ads that they think are really strong and that will work well. They present it to the client and they're told, oh, this just doesn't fit with our brand guidelines. And it's a point of tension and frustration for many people. With that in mind, are there any ways that you would say that, if you do work for a bigger brand, and you do need to keep the brand team on board and have some level of consistency, is there any way to strike a balance between these kind of copy localizations and also retaining the brand that you're known for?
Yeah, so this is what it's all about, really, because if it goes wrong, it can go horribly wrong, right? And you can say the wrong thing or say something you don't mean, or things taken in translation. It can all go horribly wrong and not be great for your brand, right? So yeah, from a brand safety point of view, I mean, I've worked with so many teams at massive brands, and that's really just been central to the whole thing. And this is why I say, if you're not sure about a country, don't advertise in it. It's just not worth the effort. It can be, like, great example there, working with the brand team, going through the creative, going through those stages of approval can take a long time. So again, you want to make sure it's something that is worth doing, something that, you're invested in that country for the long term. You're not just going to test it for a month or two. That's why I say, like, the best thing to do is, if you're not sure about a country, obviously I can't look at people's accounts right now, but generally, like, you might as well pause it, or you might as well, sit and reevaluate at least, because it can be a lot of work and effort. But yeah, as far as working with different brand teams, like, it can be a really long process, and it's really important to get those translations right.
It can cause some painful moments if it's kind of not done carefully. So yeah, definitely worth paying attention to. With that in mind, is there any kind of, parting words of advice or tips that you would give to people if they are interested in, taking this approach seriously and giving it the time it requires?
Yeah, so just 80-20 it. That's the frame I'd use in my head. Think about, what are the 20% of actions that I get 80% of the results from. Just apply that to your countries. And if you're in the US, states as well, I would just view them as countries, basically, in Google Ads. Just try and basically focus on what's working, I would say, instead of trying to spread yourself thin over, like, advertising over 10 countries. Like, it never works.
Yeah, that's the perfect place to wrap up there. And I just want to say thank you again, Tomasz, for joining us. It's a pleasure, as always. And where can people go to connect with you and learn more about PPC Profit Club and the other things that you've got going on?
Yeah, so ppcprofitclub.com. You can find everything out there. Check me out on LinkedIn. Send me a message if you like this. If you have any follow-up questions, I'll be interested to hear your feedback or any challenges that you're facing around localization. Thanks for having me on, man.
Perfect. Yeah, great to see the community you've been building up over there, Tomasz, and thanks again for joining me today. That's it for this episode of the Paid Media Lab. Thank you for tuning in. If you found it helpful, hit the subscribe button to get the next episode as soon as it's released. Subscribing costs nothing. It only takes a few seconds to do, but it makes a huge difference to us because it enables us to continue booking the best possible guests and delivering you great content. In the meantime, if you're looking for more free guides, tips, and tools, head to lunio.ai and click on the resources tab in the nav bar. And lastly, if you know any other marketers who'd find these strategies helpful, please do tell them about the show, and I'll see you in the next episode.